The crack of a whip echoed through the small frontier town of Cottonwood Springs, drowning out Penelope Lambert's scream as her husband dragged her across their yard in broad daylight, neighbors watching in stunned silence. It was 1876 in the Wyoming Territory, and as much as folks whispered about Edgar Lambert's cruelty behind closed doors, no one dared interfere in a man's family business. "You'll learn your place, woman," Edgar snarled, his face contorted with rage, spittle flying from his lips. At 45, he was 20 years her senior, a man who'd amassed a small fortune in cattle and land and a reputation for his vicious temper. "Think you can embarrass me in front of the whole town? Think again." Penelope struggled against his iron grip, her honey blonde hair falling from its pins as he yanked her toward the storm cellar behind their impressive two-story house. At 25, she had spent 6 years married to a man whose charm had dissolved into tyranny the moment the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. "Edgar, please," she begged, digging her heels into the dirt. "I only asked about the missing money." "The ranch hands need to be paid," his hand cracked across her face, splitting her lip. "The money goes where I say it goes, and you'll stay where I put you until you remember how a proper wife behaves." With brutal efficiency, he shoved her down the wooden steps into the dank cellar, where the smell of earth and mold hung heavy in the air. Penelope stumbled, falling hard onto the packed dirt floor as Edgar slammed the heavy wooden door. The sound of the iron bolt sliding into place was like a death knell. "Edgar," she screamed, rushing up the stairs to pound on the door. "You can't leave me down here." His laughter filtered through the wood. "I can do whatever I please with what's mine. Maybe a few days in the dark will remind you of that." His footsteps faded away, leaving Penelope in the dimness of the cellar, illuminated only by thin slivers of light from the cracks in the wooden door. She slid down to sit on the steps, cradling her throbbing face in her hands, her wedding ring catching what little light penetrated her prison. She had made a terrible mistake 6 years ago, believing Edgar Lambert's promises of security and comfort. The daughter of a failed shopkeeper, she'd seen marriage to the prosperous rancher as her escape from poverty after her father's death left her with nothing but debts. Now she was trapped in a marriage that had become a cage, with a husband whose public face as a respected businessman masked the monster he became behind closed doors. The cellar was stocked with preserves and supplies. Edgar was nothing if not practical, but it was cold and damp, with only a small cot in the corner that he'd put there during previous punishments. Penelope wrapped her arms around herself, her thin cotton dress providing little warmth against the underground chill. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Without a window, she couldn't tell if hours or days had passed. She rationed the water in the barrel, eating sparingly from the preserves. Her thoughts turned darker with each passing hour. This wasn't the first time Edgar had locked her away, but it was the longest. Maybe he didn't plan to let her out at all. Miles away, at the edge of Cottonwood Springs, Noah Young adjusted his worn leather hat against the blistering afternoon sun. At 30, he'd spent half his life driving cattle, fighting outlaws, and wandering the frontier. The last 2 years he'd worked as a ranch hand for various outfits, saving his money with quiet determination. He'd come to Wyoming with purpose, to buy his own small spread and put down roots at last. "Young, get over here." The voice of Thaddeus Wilson, owner of the Triple W Ranch where Noah had been working for the past season, carried across the yard. Noah strode over to where Wilson stood beside his wagon. The older man's face was grim, his normally jovial expression replaced by something darker. "Need you to make a supply run into town," Wilson said, handing Noah a list. "And keep your ears open. Edgar Lambert's apparently gone on a tear again." Noah's jaw tightened. He'd heard about Lambert, a man with too much money and too little conscience. "What's he done this time?" Wilson sighed, lowering his voice though no one was within earshot. "Word is he's locked his wife in their cellar going on 3 days now, after dragging her through the street like a sack of feed." A cold anger settled in Noah's chest. "And nobody's done anything about it. It's his wife, young. Law doesn't much care what a man does with his own." Wilson shook his head. "Just get the supplies, and stay clear of Lambert. Man's got the sheriff in his pocket, and enough hired guns to make trouble for anyone who crosses him." Noah nodded, though the instruction sat like acid in his stomach. He'd seen enough injustice in his years on the frontier to know that sometimes a man had to stand for what was right. Law be damned. The ride into Cottonwood Springs was swift, Noah's mind churning over what Wilson had told him. He'd never met Lambert's wife, but he'd glimpsed her once from a distance, a slender woman with golden hair who'd seemed to shrink into herself when her husband appeared at her side. The image had stuck with him, perhaps because something in her bearing had reminded him of his mother in the days before she'd escaped his own brutal father. In town, Noah handled his business efficiently, loading supplies into the wagon while keeping his ears open to the gossip flowing through the general store and saloon. What he heard made his blood boil. Lambert had indeed locked his wife in the storm cellar after publicly humiliating her. Worse, he'd left town the following day on business, telling people he'd be gone at least a week. "Left her down there with barely enough to get by," whispered Mabel, the shopkeeper's wife, her voice heavy with disapproval. "And with that storm coming." Noah looked toward the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. A spring storm in Wyoming could turn deadly, and low-lying areas like Cellars were known to flood. As he finished loading the wagon, a decision crystallized in his mind. He couldn't ride back to the Triple W knowing a woman was imprisoned, possibly facing death by drowning when the storm broke. Whatever the consequences, he had to act. Under the pretense of having a drink before the journey back, Noah made his way to the saloon where he found Abel Johnson, an older ranch hand who'd worked for Lambert until being dismissed the previous winter. Lambert's place, how well is it guarded with him gone? Noah asked quietly, sliding a whiskey across to the man. Abel's weathered face crinkled with interest. "Down to skeleton crew. Most of the boys went with him to Denver." He studied Noah's expression. "You thinking of doing something foolish, young? Just asking questions." "Well, here's an answer you didn't ask for. The storm cellar's around back, hidden by the woodpile. Only Lambert and his foreman Dawson have keys, and Dawson's with him in Denver." Abel drained his whiskey. "Not that I'm suggesting anything, mind you." Noah nodded, placing money on the bar. "Much obliged." "If you're really not suggesting anything," Noah added quietly, "any idea where Dawson keeps his spare key?" Abel's lips twitched. "Hung on a nail in the tack room, but you'd need to get past the 2 hands left watching the place." As dusk fell, the first fat raindrops began to splatter against the dusty street. Noah left the supplies with instructions for them to be delivered to the Triple W, saying he had personal business to attend to. Then he rode out of town, but not toward the ranch. Instead, he circled back, approaching the Lambert property from the cover of a stand of cottonwoods as darkness, and the increasing rainfall provided additional concealment. The Lambert house stood on a small rise, impressive with its painted clapboards and glass windows, a symbol of wealth in a territory where most made do with far less. Noah tethered his horse in the trees and made his way cautiously toward the ranch buildings. As Abel had said, only 2 men appeared to be on guard, and they were both huddled in the bunkhouse, more interested in their card game than in standing watch in the downpour. Moving silently, despite his size, Noah slipped into the barn and found the tack room. The key hung exactly where Abel had said it would be. Pocketing it, he made his way back into the rain, circling the house toward the woodpile Abel had mentioned. The storm was intensifying, water already pooling in low areas. If the cellar door was as weathered as most, water would soon begin seeping in. Noah pushed aside split logs to reveal the heavy wooden door set into the ground, secured with a substantial iron bolt and padlock. Kneeling in the mud, he tried the key. It wouldn't fit. Either Abel had been mistaken, or this was a different lock. Frustration and urgency warred within him as the rain pelted down harder. There was no time to look for another key. Water was already beginning to run toward the cellar door in rivulets. Penelope huddled on the narrow cot, watching with growing terror as water began to seep under the cellar door. The storm had started hours ago, the sound of rain hammering against the wood growing more intense with each passing minute. Now, what had begun as a trickle was becoming a steady flow, the earthen floor turning to mud as the water spread. She'd already moved what supplies she could to higher shelves, but the cot's legs were disappearing into the rising water. In the near darkness, she calculated how long it might be before the water reached a dangerous level. Hours, perhaps, at this rate. Edgar might have finally succeeded in ridding himself of the wife he'd come to despise, without ever having to dirty his hands with murder. A sudden thump against the cellar door made her jump, then another louder, more deliberate. Someone was out there. "Hello," she called out, scrambling through the water to the steps. "Is someone there? Please help me." The response was another powerful thud, this one splintering the wood around the hinges. Hope surged through Penelope as she realized someone was trying to break in to rescue her. Outside, Noah braced himself against the driving rain, using a fallen log as a battering ram against the cellar door. The padlock and bolt were too strong to break, but the wood around the hinges was beginning to give way. He could hear a woman's voice from below, confirming his fears. Lambert had indeed left his wife to potentially drown in the storm. With a final powerful thrust, the hinges tore free from the frame, the door collapsing inward. Noah cast the log aside and dropped to his knees at the opening, rain cascading down his face as he peered into the darkness below. A woman stood halfway up the steps, soaked to the skin, her blonde hair plastered to her pale face, blue eyes wide with disbelief and hope. "Madam," Noah said, extending his hand, "I believe it's time you came out of there." Penelope stared up at the stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, rain dripping from the brim of his cowboy hat, his face shadowed but his extended hand steady. Without hesitation, she reached for him. His grip was strong and sure as he pulled her up the remaining steps. As she emerged into the stormy night, he didn't release her, but instead swept her into his arms, lifting her clear of the flooding cellar in a single powerful motion. "I've got you," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "You're safe now." Penelope clung to him, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from imprisonment to freedom, from darkness to the wild, rain-lashed night. She didn't know this man, but in that moment, she trusted him completely. "We need to get to shelter," Noah said, carrying her through the deluge toward the barn. "Can you walk?" "Yes," she nodded, though she was shivering violently. "Put me down. I don't want to burden you further." He set her carefully on her feet but kept a steadying hand at her elbow. Together they splashed through the muddy yard to the barn, where Noah pushed open the heavy door and guided her inside. The abrupt absence of rain was startling, the relative quiet broken only by their breathing and the drumming on the roof. In the dimness, Noah struck a match and lit a lantern hanging from a post. In its warm glow, he got his first clear look at the woman he'd rescued and felt something shift inside him. Despite her bedraggled appearance, she was beautiful, with delicate features and remarkable blue eyes that held both gratitude and wariness. A bruise darkened one cheekbone, and her split lip told of the violence she'd endured before being locked away. "I'm Noah Young," he said, removing his dripping hat. "I work at the W, Penelope Lambert," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "And I'm deeply in your debt, Mr. Young." "No debt," he said firmly. "No one deserves to be treated like that." A shudder ran through her that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "My husband would disagree, and when he returns and finds me gone." She trailed off, the implications clear. "He won't find you," Noah said with quiet determination, "because you won't be here." He began gathering blankets from a nearby stack. "Can you ride?" Penelope nodded, her mind racing to catch up with this sudden turn of events. "Yes, but where would I go? Edgar has friends throughout the territory. He'd find me." "Not where I'm taking you," Noah assured her, draping a dry blanket around her shoulders. "I know a place, a homestead north of here. Belongs to a widow who doesn't ask questions and doesn't answer them either. You'd be safe there until we figure out something permanent." "We." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Noah's expression softened. "I won't leave you to face this alone, Mrs. Lambert. Not unless you want me to." For a moment, Penelope was speechless. In 6 years of marriage, she'd forgotten what it was like to be treated with simple human kindness. That this stranger would risk himself to help her was almost beyond comprehension. "Thank you," she whispered finally. "And it's Penelope, please." A small smile touched Noah's lips. "Penelope, then." They waited out the worst of the storm in the barn, Noah keeping a cautious watch while Penelope changed into dry clothes he'd found in a trunk, presumably belonging to one of the ranch hands. The shirt and trousers were far too large, but with a rope for a belt and the sleeves rolled up, they would suffice until better options were available. As the rain subsided to a gentle patter, Noah saddled 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding and a swift mare from Lambert's stock. "Consider it partial payment for your suffering," he said when Penelope expressed concern about taking her husband's property. They rode out into the night, keeping to back trails and stream beds to hide their tracks. Penelope, despite her exhaustion, sat straight in the saddle, her face set with determination. Whatever fears she harbored about the future, she had made her choice to flee rather than return to Edgar's abuse. The widow's homestead was as remote as Noah had promised, a small but well-maintained cabin nestled in a hidden valley some 15 miles north of Cottonwood Springs. They arrived as dawn was breaking, the storm clouds giving way to a brilliant sunrise that painted the mountains gold. Martha Finch, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes, asked no questions when Noah explained they needed shelter. She simply showed Penelope to a small but clean bedroom and brought her a nightgown and fresh water. "Rest," the older woman said simply. "You're safe here." For 3 days, Penelope barely left the bedroom, sleeping away the exhaustion of her ordeal and beginning to heal from both physical and emotional wounds. Noah came and went, bringing supplies and news from town. Edgar had returned early from his trip, enraged to find his wife gone and the cellar door broken. He'd put out word that she'd been kidnapped, offering a substantial reward for her return and for information about her abductor. "The story's not holding much water," Noah told her on the evening of the 3rd day as they sat at Martha's kitchen table. "Too many people saw how he treated you, and Abel Johnson's been spreading tales about Lambert's other misdeeds. Seems your husband's not as respected as he thought." Penelope's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. "That may be, but he's still powerful, and I'm still legally his wife." Martha, who had been silently knitting by the fire, spoke up unexpectedly. "Not if you divorce him, girl." "Divorce?" Penelope looked startled. "Is that even possible?" "Wyoming territory's progressive that way," Martha nodded. "Women can own property, vote, and yes, divorce husbands who beat them. Been that way since '69. Noah leaned forward. "She's right. And I know a lawyer in Cheyenne who could help. Man named Caldwell who doesn't mind ruffling feathers." Hope flickered in Penelope's eyes. "I have no money of my own. Edgar controls everything." "You have that mare," Martha pointed out practically. "And those earrings you're wearing look valuable enough. Start there. Over the following weeks, a plan took shape. Noah would escort Penelope to Cheyenne, where she would meet with Caldwell and file for divorce on grounds of cruelty. The journey would be risky. Edgar had men watching the roads and had convinced the local sheriff that Penelope had been taken against her will, but it was necessary. She couldn't hide at Martha's forever. During this time, something else was developing, a deepening connection between Penelope and Noah. It began with small moments. His gentle concern when nightmares woke her screaming, her quiet appreciation of his unwavering support, shared conversations by lamplight about their pasts and hopes for the future. Noah told her of his own childhood with a violent father, his years of drifting, and his dream of a small ranch where he could raise horses. Penelope shared her own shattered dreams of the children Edgar had never wanted, of the garden she'd never been allowed to plant, of the books he'd forbidden her to read. "I married him because I was desperate," she admitted one evening as they sat on Martha's porch watching the sunset. "My father died leaving nothing but debts, and Edgar seemed so charming, so generous. By the time I saw the truth, it was too late." "It's never too late to start over," Noah said softly, "to find what you really want." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that neither was yet ready to name. Penelope looked away first, her cheeks coloring. "I'm still married," she reminded him gently, "and likely to be for some time." Noah nodded, respecting the boundary she'd set. Some things are worth waiting for. The journey to Cheyenne was fraught with tension. They traveled by night when possible, avoiding main roads and towns where Edgar's influence might reach. Noah was constantly vigilant, his hand never far from the revolver at his hip. Penelope, dressed in men's clothing with her hair tucked under a hat, rode beside him with growing confidence, her own determination strengthening with each mile that separated her from her past. They were a day's ride from Cheyenne when disaster struck. Stopping at a small trading post to replenish supplies, they were recognized by a cattle buyer who'd done business with Edgar. The man slipped away while Noah was negotiating for provisions, and by the time they realized they'd been identified, it was too late. 4 of Edgar's men intercepted them on the road, armed and intent on taking Penelope back. "Mrs. Lambert," called the leader, a hard-faced man named Harlow who served as Edgar's right hand. "Your husband's mighty worried about you. Time to come home." Noah positioned his horse protectively in front of Penelope's. "The lady isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go." Harlow's smile was cold. "That's not your decision, Cowboy. Lambert's offering $100 for her safe return and $50 for the man who took her, dead or alive." "I wasn't taken," Penelope called out, moving her horse alongside Noah's despite his attempt to keep her back. "I left of my own free will after Edgar locked me in a flooding cellar and left me to die." Harlow shrugged. "That's between you and your husband. Now come along peaceful-like, and maybe we won't have to hurt your friend here." Noah's hand moved to his gun. 4 against 1 isn't great odds," he said quietly to Penelope. "When I create a distraction, you ride hard for that ravine we passed. Don't look back." "I won't leave you," she hissed back. "You have to. This is your chance for freedom. Take it." Before she could argue further, Noah drew and fired in one smooth motion, hitting the ground near the horses of Edgar's men. The animals reared in panic, throwing 2 of the riders. In the chaos, Noah shouted, "Go!" And Penelope, after one anguished look at him, dug her heels into her mare's sides and galloped toward the ravine. The gunfight was brief but violent. Noah managed to wound one man and unhorse another, but a bullet grazed his temple, momentarily stunning him. As he struggled to clear his vision, Harlow closed in, pistol aimed at Noah's chest. "Lambert said dead or alive," he sneered. "Dead's easier to transport." A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Harlow's gun. The man jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face before he toppled from his saddle. Behind him, Penelope sat astride her mare, a small derringer smoking in her hand. "I told you I wouldn't leave you," she said, her voice shaking but determined. The remaining men, seeing their leader fall and facing an armed woman as well as a recovering Noah, decided discretion was the better part of valor. They retreated, taking their wounded with them and leaving Harlow's body in the dirt. "You came back," Noah said, pressing a bandana to his bleeding temple as they rode hard away from the scene, knowing the men would likely return with reinforcements. "Of course I did," Penelope replied simply. "You risked everything for me. How could I do any less for you?" They pushed on through the night, reaching Cheyenne by dawn. Exhausted and battered but alive, they found lodging at a small hotel on the outskirts of town, where the proprietor, a sympathetic woman named Mrs. Chen, didn't look too closely at their disheveled appearance or ask questions about Noah's bandaged head. "We made it," Penelope said softly, standing at the window of her small room, watching the town come to life in the early morning light. "I can hardly believe it." Noah, leaning against the doorframe, watched her with undisguised admiration. "You shot a man to save me." She turned to face him, her expression solemn. "He would have killed you. Most women I know would have kept riding." "I'm not most women," she said simply, "and you're not most men." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings. Noah straightened, taking a step toward her before stopping himself. "We should rest. Tomorrow we'll see Caldwell." Penelope nodded, though her eyes held his a moment longer than necessary. Tomorrow. Lawyer Elias Caldwell was not what Penelope had expected. Young, energetic, and openly outraged by her story, he immediately agreed to take her case, drawing up divorce papers that very afternoon. "Wyoming Territory leads the nation in women's rights," he explained, his pen scratching across the document. "And judges here take a particularly dim view of men who abuse their wives. With witnesses to the Cellar incident and evidence of prior mistreatment, we have an excellent chance of success." "What about Edgar's influence?" Penelope asked anxiously. "He has money connections." Caldwell smiled thinly. "So do I, Mrs. Lambert, and unlike your husband, my connections are honorable men who despise bullies. Trust me, this is one fight Edgar Lambert will not win." The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed. Edgar, enraged at being publicly challenged, made the tactical error of threatening both the judge and Caldwell, resulting in a contempt charge that undermined his position further. Witnesses came forward, former employees, neighbors who had seen the abuse but remained silent, even the doctor who had treated Penelope's injuries over the years. Through it all, Noah remained at her side, a steady presence in the courtroom and a vigilant protector outside it. Edgar's men made one attempt to intimidate Penelope at her hotel, only to find themselves facing not only Noah, but also several deputies whom Caldwell had arranged to provide additional security. "You think you can escape me?" Edgar hissed during a recess in the proceedings, having maneuvered to corner Penelope momentarily in the courthouse corridor. "You're mine until death, Penelope. Remember that." Before she could respond, Noah was there, inserting himself between them. "Step back, Lambert," he warned, his voice deadly quiet, Edgar's face contorted with rage. "You, the man who stole my wife. I'll see you hang before this is over." "No one stole me," Penelope said, finding her voice. "You lost me through your own cruelty. And now the whole territory knows what kind of man you really are." Edgar's hand twitched toward his pocket, where Penelope knew he kept a small knife. Noah tensed, ready to intercept any attack, but at that moment, Caldwell appeared with two deputies. "Is there a problem here?" The lawyer asked pleasantly, though his eyes were hard as he looked at Edgar. Lambert forced a smile. "No problem at all, just a private conversation with my wife." "Soon-to-be ex-wife," Caldwell corrected, whom you are court-ordered not to approach. Deputies, please escort Mr. Lambert back to the courtroom. As Edgar was led away, Penelope released a shaky breath. He'll never accept this. Even with a divorce granted, he'll keep coming after me. Noah's expression was grim. Then we'll need to make sure he can't find you. The divorce was granted on a crisp autumn day, the judge's ruling unequivocal in its condemnation of Edgar's conduct. As part of the settlement, Penelope was awarded a modest financial compensation enough, Caldwell assured her, to start a new life elsewhere. Where will you go? The lawyer asked as they left the courthouse for the final time. Lambert's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. Penelope glanced at Noah, who had been unusually quiet since the verdict. I'm not sure yet. Caldwell nodded understandingly. Well, when you decide, let me know. I can arrange for any communications to be routed through my office to protect your whereabouts. That evening, Penelope and Noah sat in the small parlor of Mrs. Chen's hotel, a fire crackling in the grate, the weight of decisions hanging between them. I've been thinking, Noah began hesitantly. About what comes next? Penelope looked up from the cup of tea she'd been contemplating. So have I. I have enough saved to buy a small spread near the Montana border, he continued. Good land for horses, far from Lambert's influence. I'll be heading there next week. Her heart stuttered. I see. Noah took a deep breath. I'd like you to come with me, not as, I know it's too soon and you've just gained your freedom, I wouldn't presume to. He trailed off, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. A small smile touched Penelope's lips. Are you asking me to accompany you as what exactly, Mr. Young? As my friend, he said firmly. As someone I care about deeply and want to protect. The land has a small second cabin. You'd have your own space, your own independence, and perhaps in time. In time, she prompted softly. Noah met her eyes directly. In time, if you came to feel for me what I already feel for you, perhaps as more. Penelope set down her teacup and moved to sit beside him on the small sofa. What if I told you I already know how I feel? His breath caught. Penelope. You broke down a door to save me, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You lifted me out of darkness when I had lost all hope. You stood beside me when everyone else looked away. How could I not love you for that? Noah's hand found hers, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I don't want your gratitude. This isn't gratitude, she assured him. This is me seeing clearly for the first time in years, knowing what I want and being brave enough to reach for it. He searched her face, looking for any hint of doubt. Are you sure? After everything you've been through? Because of everything I've been through, she corrected him. I know the difference now between a man who wants to possess me and a man who wants to walk beside me. I choose the latter. I choose you, Noah Young. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of new beginnings. Spring came early to the northern Wyoming territory, painting the rolling hills with wildflowers and fresh grass. On a modest ranch nestled against a backdrop of mountains, Penelope stood on the porch of a newly constructed house, watching as Noah worked with a spirited young colt in the corral nearby. 6 months had passed since they'd left Cheyenne. Traveling north to the land Noah had purchased far enough from Cottonwood Springs to be safe, close enough to civilization to not feel isolated. In that time, they had built not just physical structures but a life together, step by careful step. They had married in a small ceremony in Billings, with Martha Finch and Elias Caldwell as witnesses. The news of Edgar Lambert's death in a barroom brawl 2 months later had brought complicated emotions relief, mingled with a strange sadness for the man he might have been. Now, as Noah looked up from his work and caught sight of her watching him, his face broke into the smile that never failed to warm her heart. He secured the colt and walked toward her, removing his hat as he approached. "You're supposed to be resting," he chided gently, his eyes dropping to the slight swell of her belly visible beneath her apron. Penelope placed a hand over the child that would arrive in the fall, their child, created in love rather than obligation. I was restless, and the view was too tempting to resist. Noah climbed the steps and wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Which view would that be? The mountains or the man?" she laughed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Both have their merits, but I find myself partial to the man." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting golden light across their land, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here from darkness to light, from captivity to freedom, from fear to love. The scars remained, both visible and hidden, but they no longer defined her. "What are you thinking about?" Noah asked, sensing her introspection. Penelope turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "I'm thinking that some doors need to be broken down before you can find your way into the light." His eyes softened with understanding. He bent to kiss her, a kiss that held the memory of that stormy night when he'd lifted her from darkness, and the promise of all the bright days that lay ahead. "Welcome to the light, Penelope Young," he whispered against her lips. "Welcome home.